From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Kristen Amiot. It's Monday, November 4. Top government bureaucrats will be grilled over Anthony Albanese's relationship with former Qantas boss Alan Joyce this week. Coalition senators have indicated they want to determine if the PM used his authority as Transport Minister to protect the airline from competition. Those stories are live right now at theaustralian.com.au. The student debts of 3 million Australians will be slashed without affecting the government's bottom line. But experts say that creative accounting is hiding big deficits in the budget. There's just a few sleeps until Americans decide if Kamala Harris or Donald Trump will be their next president. In today's episode, our correspondent speaks to Democrat and Republican voters on the ground and catches up with one of the most unique players in American politics. On January 6, 2021, Cameron Stewart was making his way to the White House to hear then-President Donald Trump speak. Cam was the Australian's Washington correspondent at the time, and Trump, the incumbent, had just been robbed, he says, of a second consecutive term as president.
Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about. And to use a favorite term that all of you people really came up with, we will stop the steal.
It was there in the street that Cam had a chance encounter with a bare-chested man wearing a fur headdress replete with horns. His bearded face was painted in red, white and blue. In the hours that followed, thousands of Trump supporters would storm the Capitol building, motivated by a belief the election had been stolen from their leader.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
As the throngs overwhelmed every inch of the Capitol building, that man, horned hat and all, sat atop the chair of the Speaker as chaos rained down around him. Jacob Chanley came to be known as the QAnon shaman, a symbol of the Capitol riots and of the resistance against what he calls the deep state that he believes installed Joe Biden as Trump's successor. Last week, Cam crossed paths with him again, this time on the fringe of the Arizona desert in Phoenix, where he lives.
I've always wondered what he thinks of American politics 4 years later. And it was interesting to speak to him. He's very much of that, far-right fringe of American politics, where he's very conspiratorial, very anti-government, anti-institutions. He doesn't trust them, really thinks that the deep state is controlling a lot of what happens in American politics, and he certainly doesn't believe that if Kamala Harris wins the election that it will have been a fair election.
Oh, the end of America as we know it. The reason why I say that is this. They're, first of all, importing a bunch of voters from all over the world. And if they give them citizenship, especially in these swing states, then they're going to change the swing states from swing states to blue states. If we start talking about...
It's very interesting to get those perspectives because in America, this sort of far-right conspiratorial fringe, if you like, is not really that much of a fringe. January the 6th happened. These people are players to some degree in American politics. So I thought it would be really interesting for the readers to get a bit of a sense of that. And certainly, to be fair to him, he didn't strike me at all as a violent person or anything like that. He's a guy who's basically very much caught up in these unusual beliefs.
Jacob Chanley served 27 months in prison for his part in the events of January 6. His horned headdress and the spear he carried into the Capitol have been confiscated by the FBI. Because of his conviction, he can't vote. But he believes Donald Trump will win in a landslide when his countrymen cast their ballots on Tuesday. The polls suggest otherwise.
It's fascinating because I think for the last 10 days, we've seen a slow rise in Trump's approval ratings and polls across the board to such that he's passed Kamala Harris only very narrowly in 5 of the 7 swing states, which will determine the election. But his momentum has stalled somewhat. And Harris, according to at least one new poll, is actually up still in the 3 so-called blue wall states. The way Harris will win this presidency is if she wins 3 states, simple as that. Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, the so-called blue wall states. She's got a much better chance of winning all 3 of those than she has the other states, Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, and Nevada. And so that's her ticket to victory. And at this minute, she's holding firm, and she's actually, depending on the polls you read, she's certainly looking reasonably good in Michigan and Wisconsin. And Pennsylvania, which is frankly the state that will decide the election, is an absolute toss of the coin. So I think Kamala Harris has actually come back a little bit in a way that some people perhaps weren't expecting. So, good luck in predicting it. But I think that those people who were assuming that Trump is sliding ahead and might have quite a comfortable victory, it certainly doesn't look like that at this minute.
In 2016, pollsters predicted a resounding victory for the Democratic nominee, Hillary Clinton. But wins by Donald Trump in key battleground states like Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Ohio saw him elected as the United States' 45th president and prompted a reckoning among pollsters.
What went wrong with the numbers?
How did the polls miss this?
Okay, so we know who won the presidential election, we know who lost. But how come so many pre-election polls missed it?
Despite efforts to restore confidence during the 2020 election, the polls underestimated the Trump vote yet again, and a predicted Republican wave failed to eventuate during the midterms. So the question now becomes, how much credence should we give to the polls this time around?
They've been wrong 3 times in 3 big contests. However, they've been wrong in different directions. The pollsters always say they're improving things and these polls are going to be the best that we've ever seen. But my God, because they're so close, each of the 7 swing states is still within the margin of error, according to the polls. And because they're so close, they would have to be very accurate to be entirely right. So I think the answer is, look, the polls probably will not turn out to be as accurate as we think, but only because it's so close between the candidates.
Coming up, the big issues dividing American voters ahead of Tuesday's election. Cameron Stewart has returned to his old stomping ground in the US ahead of Tuesday's presidential election. There, he's been talking with voters from across the political spectrum and the geographical divide.
I've travelled through Arizona, through Nevada, and I'm now in Detroit, Michigan. So that's 2 key swing states. And I've spoken to people from a whole range of suburbs in those places, like the wealthier suburbs, poorer suburbs. I've spoken to African Americans, Native Americans, a whole range of different type of voting demographics. And look, it's just fascinating what is really concerning people here in America. And of course, obviously, what concerns Republican voters or Trump voters is quite different to what concerns Kamala Harris voters.
In September, inflation in America dropped to its lowest point in 3 years. The US Federal Reserve has cut the cash rate by 50 basis points since then and is widely tipped to do it again at its upcoming meetings, further easing pressure on mortgage holders. The cost of fuel has dropped by more than 10% since mid-2023. But the cost of staples like food and household energy expenditure remains stubbornly high.
But certainly across the spectrum, the biggest issue for the Republican voters for sure is price rises. It's inflation. They just say that Trump is better for the economy than Harris because the economy was strong during his first 4 years, but they do definitely greatly dislike the price rises that have happened. Voters here in America are simply looking at the cup of coffee is now double what it was when Biden came into power. The grocery bills double, etc., etc. So the great question is to what extent they will punish Kamala Harris for that, because they certainly blame her as much as Biden for that inflation.
Republican voters also see Kamala Harris as being weak on border control. She was appointed by Joe Biden to stem the flow of illegal border crossings, but no real progress was made until the middle of this year, when tighter controls were enacted. By comparison, immigration is Donald Trump's favourite subject, and he's been effective at communicating his plan to deport more than 10 million undocumented immigrants by force if necessary.
Republicans always say to me they're very disappointed in the border because the first 3.5 years of the Biden administration was very loose border control, but that residual effect, just the inflation effect, is still really annoying Republican voters.
I don't like what's happened in the last 4 years. I don't like what they did at the border. It just wasn't wise. To me, it was almost betrayal of America policies, America as we know it.
The third motivator for Republicans is Kamala Harris. They say regularly she's not experienced enough. What's she doing there? A couple of them told me that they believe she's faking it, that she's much more to the left than what she's portraying herself as, and they say that this move to the centre from Kamala Harris that we've seen during this campaign is in fact fake. They also don't see her as particularly strong. They're concerned that she won't stand up to other countries around the world in a time of crisis.
This will be my third time voting for Donald Trump. I don't care if you're a man or a woman or a giraffe. Like, she can't do the job, you know?
The Democrats Cam's spoken to, on the other hand, have a much more narrow focus. That's the state of America's healthcare system and, specifically, abortion access.
And as far as the Democrats go, their main issue quite frequently has been abortion. And not just the women I've spoken to, but men as well. Reproductive rights is a very big ticket for the Democrats. They're very disappointed that Republicans have tried to shut down abortion access since Roe versus Wade was struck down by the Supreme Court. The other big issue, and arguably the biggest issue for all the Democrat voters, is simply Trump. It's simply a dislike of who he is as a person. They say he's distrustful, he's thuggish, he's distasteful. Everything about his personality is what they don't like.
I voted for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Why? Because I want us to stay very, very together. I grew up in segregation, so I know what it's like, and I never want that for my grandkids.
Some of them have relatively different viewpoints. One told me gun control was his biggest issue. Another, two ladies I spoke to today who are recovering from cancer said the fear that Trump might repeal the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, was a big motivating factor. So, look, every voter is understandably motivated by their own things, but that's the themes that I'm seeing here on the ground in America.
Cameron Stewart is the Australian's chief international correspondent. You can read all our correspondents' reporting and analysis of the upcoming US election right now at theaustralian.com.au.